Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome. Horse meat has contaminated the UK food chain. Pork DNA has been identified in prison meals. On this evening's big question, we're asking how halal is halal. I'm delighted to be joined by the Chief Executive of the Universal Halal Agency, Nizar Boga. Nizar Boga, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Before we begin, let's give you an indication of what this whole discussion and debate is about. Here's a video.
The Food Standards Agency is now investigating how traces of pork ended up in some halal products supplied to prisons. Well, those affected pies and pasties have been withdrawn, and the Ministry of Justice has now suspended the contract of one supplier. Ashish Joshi has this report.
For Muslims, it's simply non-negotiable. All food eaten must be halal, and that means meat can never, ever contain pork. But that's exactly what's happened to Muslim inmates in some British prisons. Meat pies and pasties that were supposed to be halal have been found to contain traces of pork. The supplier has been suspended and the Food Standards Agency called in.
What we've done in the investigation so far is we know who supplied the prison service and who supplied that supplier, but the food chain is long and often complex, so we have to search right the way back to find what the ingredient was that may have caused this, where that came from, and whether any other products may be affected.
Thousands of inmates could have been exposed to the contaminated meat. 5% of the UK's population is Muslim, and according to the latest official figures, Muslims make up 13% of the prison population in England and Wales. 1/5 of males in young offenders institutions also describe themselves as Muslim. The Ministry of Justice says it's a fundamental requirement that prisoners and members of staff are provided with meals which meet an individual's religious, cultural and medical dietary needs. So it's managed to breach its own guidelines. The ministry won't identify the supplier or say what prompted the investigation in the first place. But Justice Minister Jeremy Wright did say, "This is an absolutely unacceptable situation and one which we regret greatly. Clearly this must be distressing for those affected, and they can be reassured we are doing everything we can to resolve the situation." In its defence, the Ministry of Justice says the food was sourced from a halal certified supplier. And that's where the problem might lie. Muslim rights campaigner Masood Shajara has been involved in this issue for decades. He told me there are too many halal authorities, and that compromises food regulation.
Imam comes and sees the place one day and gives a certificate for 2-3 years. And no, there are some institutions who are authorities, and then they got nice logos and everything else, doing exactly the same thing. They are not accountable to anybody. They're actually giving these certificates and receiving the revenues actually pours in.
First there was the horse meat in burgers scandal, and now this. Consumer confidence is low. Explaining how this was allowed to happen might just help. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
And welcome back. Well, there we have it. Some pretty alarming stuff that's gone on over the last few weeks in Nizar Boga. As you know, over this series, we've interviewed representatives from both the HFA and the HMC. You're obviously part of the Universal Halal Agency. I suppose one of the questions that many will be wondering is, you all sit on government sort of boards, you all attend sort of Food Standard Agency meetings together. Certainly when I've sort of thrown in different names when speaking to the different authorities, you all know one another. And therefore it sort of begs the question as to why you don't all come together, form one agency and stop all this replication.
Excellent question. And I've been trying to do this for a long, long while now. If we say we are all Muslims, and we believe in the same Quran and the same Prophet and the same religion, and therefore we must all have the same direction from that religion. So where is the difference? If there are differences, we can actually accommodate each other. But your question is absolutely vital, important, and it's about time that all the certifiers and authenticators, accreditation bodies and so on, to come together so we can have one standard, one approach, very much like the Jews have got.
Yes, I suppose the difference between the Jews and the Muslims is that the Jews don't have authorities or agencies such as yours that promote non-stunned meat, and they all seem to be united on the basis that, you know, we've got, or stunned meat rather, they all seem to be united on the basis that, look, we've got an exemption, we don't have to stun our meat. And the argument that many would present is organisations such as yours and others sort of jump on the let's start stunning meat bandwagon, and therefore we can't really use the Jews as a comparison because comparatively we're a bit of a shambles.
The Jews are a small community. A good proportion of their community don't seem to be very concerned about having to have kosher food anyway. For us, eating halal is primary and crucial. The question is always about what is the definition of halal. And the government agencies have always asked us to actually have a consensus between Muslim divisions or sects or whatever to come up with one definition of what halal is. And therefore, they can then help us to actually set up the standards that are required to actually audit the same food right from the slaughterhouses, right up to your table when you're eating it.
Sure. I mean, we'll get to the standards in a moment, but let's just focus a little bit on this whole issue of stunning versus non-stunned. Because the argument is, Arboga, that many would argue, is that those that are proponents of stunned meat are the obstruction, because we know that Muslims and Jews have an exemption. So therefore, why the need to stun meat if you've got the exemption to have non-stun meat? And when you said earlier in answer to the question, can we reconcile our differences? Well, can the difference really be reconciled? I mean, you've got organisations like the HMC who are advocates of non-stunned meat. You've got the HFA who are advocates of stunned meat. You've got your own organisation that presumably is in the stunned meat, the stunned meat rather, category. So how can there be reconciliation?
Okay, I think the first thing to bear in mind is that halal is not about meat only. It's not about food only. And it's not about stunning either only. The crucial issue about the halal authenticity starts right from the farm, where we're talking about animal welfare. And that's the whole moot point about stunning or not stunning. If we talk about respect for animal, there are verses in the Quran, there are hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ about how we should respect. And in one of the verses of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they are like communities like you, and therefore you owe them a respect. So what do? We slaughter animal if you don't stun them. What is stunning? It is simply a means of anesthetize the animal so that the animal doesn't feel pain. I will ask you, Brother Ali, if you were to go to hospital for surgery, even a minor surgery, they'll give you either a general anesthetic or a local. And the reason, you don't feel the pain when the knife goes on your skin or your body.
Yeah, but
that's exactly what happens to an animal, and that is causing pain.
Doesn't it depend? I mean, does it not depend, Nizar Boga, on how fast the blade hits the head? I mean, if someone were to chop my head off with an axe, frankly, whether I'd been anaesthetised before or after that, I don't think it'd make much of a difference. I think my head would just come straight off.
Right.
So that's a question one would sort of put to you. And the second question is, well, why don't you answer that question, then I'll get to my second question.
Very good question as well. Now I'll tell you that if you slaughter an animal without putting an animal into unconscious position, and there is nothing in the Quran or the Hadith that you can't do, let me put it very quickly, easily, straight away. There is nothing that prohibits anybody doing, putting an animal into unconscious position. The word stunning has become so dirty that people look down upon in that manner.
Sure. And while you're saying that, let me just give a quick disclaimer before we start getting phone calls of individuals who end up getting themselves in a twist. It's not a jurisprudential show. The opinions expressed are those of Nizar Boga, and if you do have any questions or queries, then you can refer them to your own scholar, which is an important issue to raise there. But yeah.
So now you slaughter an animal without putting an animal into unconscious position. Do you know the animal like lamb or the goat will suffer at least 20 seconds of conscious pain. Pain while the throat is cut, and that pain will actually take on for 20 seconds. 20 seconds. For cattle, for big animal, it goes up to 2 minutes. And you won't believe me if I tell you, for chicken, little small animal as it looks like, it's 2.5 minutes of pain, sheer pain of having a cut on the throat itself, and they can actually see blood coming out of it.
Let me put this question to you, which is, what the proponents of who are not for stunning tend to use the argument that during the stunning process, some of the chicken may die. What's your view on that?
That used to be the case. If you control stunning in a more scientific manner, and I can explain to you how you do this in a very, very scientific manner, then I can prove it to you. You can come to a slaughterhouse and see, and you can take those birds which have been stunned, take them out of the rail, shackle, put them down on the floor, and I've got video clips of that, you can see. They will revive within 2 minutes or 3 minutes.
But what about those that die? How do you distinguish between the two?
They do not die if your stunning procedure is correct. Correct frequency, in other words, low amperage with high frequency, you will not kill. You will not fibrillate, it's called. It's not killing.
Is there a possibility they might die?
No. Even if, if you go for surgery, there is always the chance that you could die, under the general anesthetic. Where do we draw the line after that? Question is, are we giving the animal the sort of pain which they don't deserve? And that is the whole issue which has engulfed the whole stunning issue about in this country.
But there is varying research, isn't there, Nizar Boga? I mean, we can't claim that the research goes either for or against. I mean, the various research that has been carried out, some is for and some is against. I mean, there is no definitive study that's been carried out.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the latest research, which is in New Zealand by Professor Dr. Craig Johnson and his colleagues at Massey University, you can read his research papers, will tell you very clearly that slaughtering an animal without anesthetic is very painful to animal. Very, very painful.
And what about the various research that's been done before that?
This is conclusive, the latest research conclusive, and the other side of it is that if you stun, the animal does not feel the pain.
So according to you, the latest research is the most conclusive?
Well,
so what about the next report that comes out that may not be, that may give the opposite perspective?
I will be surprised, because the whole world is in the business of stunning, not for commercial reasons, but for animal welfare reason, for animal rights reason. And for us to actually derogate it from it becomes rather hypocritical, because it's us that as Muslims, we've been taught in Islam in the 6th, 7th century through our scriptures, the Holy Quran, that we've got to respect the animals because they are communities like you. We've got to respect. And there are many hadiths about it. Why is it that the Prophet ﷺ said, if you're going to slaughter well, by sharpening the knife away from the animal so you don't psychologically traumatize the animal, and putting an animal at ease. Now what do you read about that? How do you put an animal? You just stamp on him and say, right, I'm going to cut your throat while he's looking. The animals who are not stunned prior to slaughter, they can see other animals in the slaughterhouses being slaughtered. They can smell blood, they can hear the cries. Is that putting an animal at ease?
The difficulty you have, Nizar Boga, with your argument, as you well know, is the fact that, how old is electricity?
It's not that old.
Precisely. It's not particularly old, is it?
Yes.
So therefore, prior to electricity, and all the verses you quote, all the hadith you quote, certainly don't make reference to electricity, don't make reference to stunning. When it says putting the animal to ease, there must be another medium by doing so, or for doing so, which doesn't include stunning, because there was no electricity during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him.
Excellent. I'm glad you mentioned it.
So therefore, the argument is that this whole issue about, if we don't stun, then we're not for animal welfare and all the rest of it, surely falls apart.
Oh no, there's much more than that. In those days, it was individual slaughter in the backyard and so on. There was no mass slaughter like slaughterhouses and so on. So therefore, that issue of another animal seeing another animal, which is forbidden to see. In fact, when the Prophet ﷺ himself reprimanded the person who saw him actually sharpening the knife in front of the animal while he said, "Are you killing him twice?"
Can one animal see another animal being stunned then?
Yeah. Well, no, you won't see that either, because it is done through a hatch. It's done in hardly 2 seconds of the tongues going here on the brain, and it drops the animal. You immediately cut the throat, and the animal can actually then be shackled immediately.
All right, well, let's move on from the stunning issue, and let's just talk a little bit about this horse meat scandal, because people are quite curious to know. I mean, the other day I was reading about horse beef burgers that were halal in Lancashire, ended up containing horse meat. That's pretty precarious stuff. I mean, in your view, how's that happened?
It happens in all establishment where food is manufactured, especially meat product or processed food called. Now it happens sometimes through accident and sometimes through greed. When you have a new species like horse meat, going literally meat, not just the traces of DNA, meat, actually pieces of meat going into your burger, then there is definitive evidence there that somebody had tried to defraud the system by putting cheaper meat into more expensive meat like beef.
Sure.
And sort of thinking that it will not. Food fraud has been going on for donkey's years now, and it is still going on. And I can give you a whole list of things which, as we are talking now, it's happening now in new form or another. Now they are putting donkey's meat and buffalo meat and so on. That's the latest one. I'm not saying here.
Yes.
But I'm not frightening you either. Fact of the matter is there is always a greed. And the greed is so pernicious because they know, everybody knows, that we've got to eat. Unlike drugs and alcohol, food is got to be eaten by everybody, and therefore there is a huge profit margin to be made in pushing everything. Those were the days when you could actually clamp down very easily. There are very few tests being done, samples being taken on a random basis by food standardization.
Well, what about, obviously one of the biggest controversies, and we watched the video earlier, related to pork DNA being found in prison meals, which caused a bit of a stir as well. I mean, we know it's DNA, it could have been cross-contamination. Do you think the issue has been blown out of proportion?
I think that, where premises like where food is manufactured, there are very, very few places where processed food is dedicated site, like halal site. We've got a community of 1.5 million Muslims in this country, although we are increasing, but our habit of eating meat is enormous, and everybody, every manufacturer, they know that we are eating meat. But what we actually are eating is pure meat, not processed meat as such. Not burgers and so on. Those are given into schools and homes, etc., etc. Sausages and so on, they are served in prisons, etc., etc. But fact of the matter is that if there are mixed sites where halal and non-halal lines are being actually run through the same premises and sometimes the same machinery, then unless you have got a very strict regime of cleaning and testing through microbiological testing and the species testing or DNA testing, what is called, to make sure that there are no bits and pieces stuck in the corner, it's bound to get in. That's number one. Number two, the Universal Halal Agency insists, before we give a certificate to anybody, we insist that the company that we would give them a certificate in the end, the whole company, including the management, quality assurance people, and the floor staff who are actually on the floor doing the thing, they take a full day course through me, which is called Understanding Halal Food. Now that gives them an advantage from floor right up to management to say where something goes wrong, they can actually put it right. It's not just annual inspection or audit to see that they comply. It's not only going through the traceability torture to find out whether they comply and so on and so on, but they have to. On top of that, Universal Halal Agency insists that every company should have a company policy declaring how halal is their halal production.
Sure. So do you think, therefore, that the pork DNA issue was blown out of proportion?
It could have been that it got in there through accident. It could be it got in there through some other route and so on. It could be there just a fluke, just one or two pieces caught up. But if there was a systematic way of sampling, then there is a possibility that we can actually say...
Is that really realistic? I mean, is that really realistic in the sense that, I mean, you've got processed food. What you're proposing is the place is, I don't know, steam cleaned or whatever, and then once it's been cleaned and disinfected, the place is tested for DNA traces. I mean, is that really realistic, Nizar Boga? And how would your organization, how would your agency actually test if that's being done?
It is done through exactly that system of actually making sure that it happens, etc., etc. And not only that, it is time-spaced. So, for instance, we would insist that if it's a mixed site, that the halal run is done on first thing on Monday morning,
right,
and then continue on Tuesday, and that's it. We know how much the volume has got to go through. And then it is clean and so on for non-halal stuff. That's their problem. End of the day, end of each day, when it's already cleaned and so on, tested, etc., etc., and much of these tests are now done on site, so it doesn't get to be...
So on Friday, for example, some of these guys work 7 days a week, so potentially, let's assume they've got non-halal meat going on Sunday, and then you've got halal on Monday.
Yes.
Therefore, we've got a bit of a problem, haven't we?
A problem in the sense that they have got to be extra careful, but they have had a time to rest. The machinery had a time to rest, not Sunday. Sunday usually they don't.
Right, so Friday.
Friday. They got 2 days complete clearances and so on. From my experience, it has been very meticulously managed. And the important thing is that not only the workers, but the managers are absolutely on the spot. They are, and what is more, they know that we can drop in anytime to check their books, when he was cleaned, when he was done this, when he was tested, etc. Let's have a look at the test result, etc., etc. Or go into very detail. You can't be too careful with the halal stuff, halal meat.
Sure.
We've got to be meticulous about this issue. Now, accidents happen everywhere, anytime it can happen. But if you have a dedicated site, I would prefer that as a first choice. Dedicated site. We know that everything on that machinery, on that site will be halal, nothing but halal. The only problem can be is the suppliers.
Sure.
Now when the supply comes in, whether it's meat or, if you like, ingredients to make the burgers or sausages, that's where the problem could lie. Not in the factory itself, but the supplies itself and so on. And that is my big headache, because when you start doing traceability, for instance, you have 20 different countries supplying 20 different ingredients for that particular burger. How are you going to thread through?
Well, how are you going to do that?
Well,
you tell us.
Precisely. I limit them. I say, look, don't give me that headache. I want you accessing your supply, but they are getting cheaper. Maybe so. You're getting it cheaper from Poland.
But is your solution really practical? I mean, if I was a meat manufacturer and you said to me, right, well, first you've got to DNA test the whole thing now and again. Then I'm going to limit your suppliers now, so you're going to get it from X number of suppliers. Frankly, many people would just sort of tell the agency to go away.
No, but the problem is even worse than that. The suppliers who have got to have certification either, it won't be universal halal very often. I have to accept that. The meat that comes in may not be halal, but it comes with a halal certification. Who am I to challenge that Mr. Ibrahim, whatever, has signed there to say it's halal? Who am I to challenge that is not halal? But the problem...
Well, you're the universal halal agency, so if meat comes in and it's got any Tom, Dick or Harry's name on it that says this is halal, surely you should engage in due diligence in ensuring where the meat comes from.
And I'll tell you how I do this. Absolutely due diligence, absolutely. I give a certificate for site and process, not for the product.
Right.
I make sure that my certificate is worded like that, halal site.
How would someone like me then realise that, someone's got the UHA logo on their chicken or whatever? How would I know? Well, okay, hold on a second. This doesn't really validate the meat, but it just makes sure that the place is nice and clean and there's a bit of traceability when it comes to the ingredients. It's not a very robust system, is it?
No, it is as robust as one can be. Nothing is 100% in life, nothing. You won't find that. That kind of perfection you won't find anywhere else. It's like looking for a completely sterile site to do things like that. But one thing that's in my asset, my background is environmental health. I was a former director of environmental health and trading standards. There is nothing in food safety, traceability, hygiene, hazard standards, and so on that I do not know about.
Sure.
And I have been advising the Central Mosque on what halal is. And I have been advising the EBLEX, for which we've done actually a whole DVD, and I'll give you a copy of that.
Yes.
You can watch that. We did the DVD, they engaged me as a consultant. We did a DVD on how to produce halal meat and so on. And I've been an advisor to the EU Direct project on what is called a religious slaughter.
Well, on that note, we need to go to a break, so we'll be talking a little bit more about this and traceability and standards and many other interesting issues after the break. You're watching The Big Question live on Ahlul Bayt TV. We shall see you shortly. Please do keep watching. Assalamu alaikum.